2 days before the wedding, I sat alone at my dining table, staring at the glossy folder Rebecca and Thomas Hayes had left behind. My fiancé's parents had swept into my apartment like they owned the air itself, dropping a 30-page prenuptial agreement as if it were a wedding gift. Their words still echoed in my ears, polished and merciless. "Sign now, dear. It's for everyone's protection." They didn't stay for coffee or pleasantries, only the ultimatum of ink on paper and a deadline that made my heart pound. I hadn't opened it yet, but I already knew what it meant. Before I continue narrating the story of Lila, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Their timing was surgical, cutting into the last fragile moments before vows were meant to seal promises. I tried to steady my hands as I finally peeled the folder open, the pages heavy with legal jargon that screamed of control rather than fairness. It wasn't a simple document of protection. It was a cage designed to strip me of any claim, any independence, and any power. They had crafted this with lawyers, no doubt, the sort who had never once asked what I wanted. The audacity almost made me laugh. But the tightness in my chest left no room for humor. What they didn't know, what no one knew except my younger brother, was that I wasn't the vulnerable woman they assumed I was. 5 years ago, after my grandmother's passing, I inherited not just memories but a fortune she had built in silence. She had worked as a nurse her entire life, clipping coupons, reusing everything, pretending poverty while quietly investing every dollar she could spare. When the will was read, I nearly collapsed at the numbers staring back at me. $7 million in stocks, property, and bonds, all waiting quietly in my name. I had chosen secrecy, wearing thrift store clothes, driving my 10-year-old sedan, and keeping my modest one-bedroom apartment. No one suspected, not even my fiancé Daniel, who thought I lived paycheck to paycheck from my small publishing startup. I never corrected him, because what I wanted most was love without calculation. If he saw me as someone of limited means, then I could see him clearly in return. For 3 years, Daniel loved me without once asking about my bank account, and that had been enough. Rebecca and Thomas, however, never bothered to look deeper. They saw a woman who edited books in a cramped office, who wore off-the-rack dresses, and who certainly didn't belong in their sprawling estates. They called me charming in the way people call a stray cat charming when it dares to linger too long on the porch. Every dinner with them felt like a job interview I wasn't qualified for, their eyes flicking over my clothes, my shoes, even my hair. They smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. And now, with this prenup, they had shown me exactly how little they thought of me. I closed the folder and pressed my palms against it, breathing slow, steady breaths. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, a cruel contrast to the storm roaring inside me. Betrayal curled in my stomach, not from Daniel, not yet, but from the realization that his parents had orchestrated this in his absence. They said he was too busy with firm obligations, which made me question if he even knew what they had done. My phone sat silent on the table, daring me to call him and demand answers. But I couldn't, not yet. Rage needed discipline, and emotion alone wouldn't win this war. My grandmother had taught me that real power lies in patience, in choosing the exact moment to reveal your hand. She had turned pennies into millions by never rushing, never blinking, never letting anyone underestimate her. That lesson burned inside me now, steadier than the fear gnawing at the edges of my resolve. If the Hayes family wanted a game, they were about to learn I'd been playing one all along. I reached for the safe beneath my bed, the one even Daniel had never seen. Inside were folders neatly labeled with investment accounts, property deeds, and statements no one outside my brother had ever laid eyes on. Touching the crisp paper calmed me, reminded me of who I really was, not the small-town girl Rebecca mocked behind pursed lips, not the fragile woman they assumed they could control, but someone with a fortune larger than their arrogance could ever calculate. Sliding the safe shut, I sat back down and started writing. Every clause from the prenup went into my notebook, my anger sharpening into clarity with each line. I wasn't going to just react. I was going to counter. Somewhere between the scent of ink and the scratching of my pen, the panic faded. By the time midnight came, I had the beginnings of a plan that would make Rebecca and Thomas regret ever walking into my apartment. Still, one truth gnawed at me, refusing to soften with strategy. Did Daniel know? The question whispered louder than any promise he had ever made, circling my mind like a hawk. If he had sent them, if he had agreed to this scheme, then the wedding wasn't just in danger. It was already dead. But if he hadn't, then he was as much a victim of their manipulation as I was. That was a question I couldn't ignore for long. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. My body lay still beneath the covers, but my mind kept spinning through every detail, every conversation, every glance I hadn't thought twice about until now. There had been hints, I realized, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. The offhand remark Rebecca once made about marrying into expectations, the time Thomas had asked if I'd be contributing to the household after the wedding. And now this prenup, elegant, poised, and poisonous. At sunrise, I called my brother Ben because I needed someone who remembered me before I'd ever met the Hayes family. He answered groggily, his voice thick with sleep, but he sobered fast once I told him what had happened. "They did what?" he said, outrage boiling beneath his words. I gave him the whole story, from the unexpected visit to the 30-page contract still sitting unopened on my table. "You want me to come over?" he asked, already pulling on a hoodie in the background. "No," I said, though part of me wanted nothing more than to see his familiar, grounding face. "I just needed to hear someone who doesn't think I'm disposable." His silence was the kind that carried 1,000 thoughts, each one protective, each one weighing what he might say to Daniel if given the chance. Finally, he exhaled. "You're not disposable, Lila. You're the most dangerous kind of woman. One who knows her worth and hides it until it matters most." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and pulled up my grandmother's attorney's contact information. There were few people I trusted with the truth of my finances, and Mr. Conrad was one of them. He had helped me restructure the inheritance in a way that made my assets airtight and invisible to prying eyes. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but when he picked up, he greeted me like no time had passed. "Miss Dalton," he said warmly, "to what do I owe this pleasure at 6:50 in the morning?" I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, scribbling notes, his occasional hum, the only indication he was still on the line. "Send me a copy of the document," he said once I'd finished, "and we'll do better. They want a prenup? Fine. We'll draft one that protects you. We'll make it so fair and pristine that even their legal team will struggle to object." I emailed him the Hayes document before breakfast and stared at the sent confirmation for a long time. There was a strange power in pressing that button, as if I'd stepped out of the role they'd written for me. This wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. A quiet line in the sand drawn with keystrokes and calculated silence. I was done playing the accommodating outsider in their precious family narrative. I hadn't spoken to Daniel since the night before, and his absence pressed against me like a second skin. No text, no call, no apology, no explanation. And that silence, more than the prenup itself, cracked something inside me. By mid-morning, I'd changed into jeans and a sweater, pulled my hair into a low bun, and walked to the corner cafe that Daniel and I had claimed as ours. It was the place he'd taken me after our third date, the place he said felt like us. Quiet, tucked away, intimate. I wasn't going there for nostalgia. I was going because I needed answers. And Daniel's assistant, Vanessa, always picked up their espresso order at precisely 10:30 a.m. Sure enough, at 10:34 she stepped through the door, coat draped over one arm, phone in the other. I waited until she'd ordered before I approached, keeping my tone pleasant but firm. "Vanessa," I said, and she jumped slightly, surprised. "Oh, Lila. Hi. I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I figured as much," I replied, watching her carefully. "I've been trying to reach Daniel. He's not answering, and I'm starting to feel like that's not a coincidence." Her expression flickered, and that was all I needed. She was hiding something. Not well, but enough to know Daniel wasn't as in the dark as I'd hoped. "Is he really unavailable?" I asked. "Or is he avoiding me?" Vanessa hesitated, eyes darting toward the counter, toward the exit, toward anything that wasn't me. "He's at the firm," she finally said, her voice low. "But he asked not to be disturbed unless it was case-related." That answer wasn't neutral. It was coached. You told me yesterday he was in depositions. I said evenly, not blinking. But I heard restaurant noise in the background. Her cheeks flushed, and her mouth opened, but no defense came out. Tell him I'll be at the park bench near the fountain at 11. If he doesn't show up, I'll know everything I need to. And then I left her there, with 2 lattes and the weight of my warning. Back at home, I checked my phone again. Nothing. I paced, fingers curled around my coffee cup like it might hold the stability I was starting to lose. But I wouldn't break. I couldn't. Not when I was so close to knowing the truth. At 11 sharp, I sat at the bench we had once carved our initials into on a rainy September evening. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. My fingers grew cold despite the warm sun. At 14 minutes past, I finally saw him jogging toward me, his coat unbuttoned, his tie crooked, guilt already painted on his face. Daniel looked like he'd been dragged through a courtroom and a confession booth, all in one morning. He slowed as he approached, breathing hard, eyes searching my face for a version of me he hoped hadn't changed overnight. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I only raised my eyebrows and waited for him to speak first. "Lila," he began, sinking onto the bench beside me, leaving 2 inches of space between us that might as well have been a chasm. "I didn't know they were going to do that, I swear to you." He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar nervous tick I'd once found endearing but now found too practiced. "They told me they were going to talk to you about the wedding budget. Maybe the guest list, Daniel," I said, my voice low and cold. "Do you think I'm stupid?" His mouth opened, then closed, and his shoulders sagged. No, of course not. Because that's the only reason you'd think I'd believe they came to talk about centerpieces and walked out after dropping a prenup like a bomb. He flinched, but I kept going. "And the fact that you've been dodging my calls only confirms what I already suspected. I didn't know it would be like that," he said, quieter now. "I knew they wanted you to sign something, but I told them to wait, to talk to me first." My laughter was sharp and humorless, startling a nearby pigeon into flight. "Then why weren't you there when they came?" I asked. "Why didn't you show up at my door with them? Or better yet, stop them from coming altogether?" His face crumpled slightly, and I saw it. Shame, the real kind, not just guilt dressed in a suit. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of what they'd do if I pushed too hard. They've threatened to cut me off before, and I didn't think I was ready to face that." He looked at me, eyes wet, but then I realized, if I'm not willing to stand up for you, what the hell am I even standing for? For a moment, I let that sit in the air between us. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it wasn't nothing either. I turned to face him fully, taking in the man I had planned to marry in less than 48 hours. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest," I said. "If they'd told you exactly what was in that agreement, every clause, every condition, would you still have let them hand it to me?" His pause was long enough to count. "I don't know," he said, and the truth of it hit harder than any lie would have. I want to say no, that I'd have stopped them, but the truth is, I've spent my whole life letting them steer the car while I sat in the passenger seat. His voice cracked, raw and exposed. "You make me want to drive." That finally broke something in me, not in a painful way, but in the way that dry earth breaks when rain finally falls. I reached into my bag and pulled out the red folder, not the one Rebecca had left, but the one Mr. Conrad's courier had delivered that morning. I placed it on his lap, meeting his eyes with steel behind mine. "This is the prenup I'll sign," I said, "but only if you're willing to put your name on it too." He opened it, flipping through the pages with increasing disbelief, his lawyer's brain engaged even through the emotion, scanning each clause, every word designed for fairness. I watched his jaw tighten, then soften, then clench again. This protects both of us," he said, his voice trembling. "It's fair. It's actually more than fair to me." "That's because I don't want to own you," I replied. "I want to marry you." I leaned in slightly, softer now. "But I will not marry a man whose parents believe I'm some peasant trying to rob their dynasty." He closed the folder carefully as if it were fragile. "You're not," he whispered, "and I'm sorry it ever looked that way." "I'm meeting your parents tonight at their place," I told him, standing, "with my attorney. We'll go over the terms. They can sign or walk." He nodded slowly, as if realizing how far out of his depth he'd always been when it came to his own family. "I'll be there," he said. No more hiding behind boardrooms or brunches. That night, the Hayes estate looked exactly as it always had. Ornate, cold, and a little too proud of its own chandeliers. But this time, I walked in with Mr. Conrad at my side, his pinstriped suit and leather folio giving him the gravity of a man who had seen everything and feared nothing. Rebecca greeted me at the door with a tight-lipped smile, Thomas barely looking up from his drink. "Lila," she said, her tone clipped, "I see you brought counsel." "Of course," I replied, handing her a folder. "Wouldn't want to sign anything without proper review." Mr. Conrad gave her a nod that somehow managed to be both polite and devastating. "You'll find the terms generous, especially considering the alternative." Rebecca's smile barely wavered as she took the folder from my hand, but I could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes. Thomas, still lounging in his leather armchair, didn't bother to hide his disdain. He scoffed quietly, swirling his scotch as if it held more significance than my entire future. Mr. Conrad and I sat on the opposite couch, perfectly composed, while the weight of the moment thickened the air like static. The silence was surgical, everyone waiting to see who would break first. "You're presenting us with a counterproposal?" Thomas finally asked, each word carved from granite. "That's correct," Mr. Conrad replied, crossing one leg over the other with ease. "Your original document was one-sided. This version ensures both parties retain individual assets, protects future intellectual property, and prevents third-party interference in personal or professional matters." Rebecca's eyes flicked to that last line, and I saw her jaw tighten ever so slightly. "We had our attorneys draft that agreement with the intention of protecting family interests," she said. "Our firm has a reputation to uphold, and unfortunately, we've seen what happens when marriages dissolve without protections in place." Her tone was cool but defensive, as though the very idea of being challenged had bruised something fragile beneath her exterior. I waited a beat before answering. "Your concern for your son's future is noted, but this document protects mine too." "Is that why you brought a lawyer?" Thomas asked, raising a thick brow. "Because you're afraid we'll strong-arm you into signing something else?" "No," I said evenly. "I brought a lawyer because I've learned that smiles can be deceptive, and family pressure is rarely subtle." Mr. Conrad nodded slightly, as if in approval of my restraint. They didn't read it right away. Of course they wouldn't. Power to them was in the waiting game, enforcing others to flinch first. Rebecca offered us tea, which we declined. She walked to the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps, her heels clicking like punctuation against the marble floor. "She's stalling," Mr. Conrad whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know," I murmured back, "but let her. The longer they pretend to think, the more control we're gaining." Thomas said nothing, but I could feel his eyes on me, measuring, recalculating, reassessing what he'd clearly underestimated. He thought I was some delicate thing Daniel picked up in a moment of rebellion. Pretty, polite, pliable, but I'd never belonged to their narrative, and I never would. Rebecca returned with tea she didn't offer us, her cup trembling just slightly in her hand. "And what exactly do you bring into this marriage that requires so much protection?" she asked. Carefully controlled, but laced with venom. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted the question to linger. I wanted her to taste it. $7 million in assets, I said calmly, and a business with long-term federal contracts for educational software. The cup clattered slightly in her saucer. Thomas sat up straighter, setting his drink down a bit too fast. "You're lying," he said, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. "Am I?" I asked, reaching into my bag and pulling out a condensed statement from one of my trust portfolios. "Because if I were lying, this would be a really stupid place to get caught." Mr. Conrad leaned forward and slid the document across the glass coffee table, his expression unreadable. "Fully audited, SEC compliant," he added. "She's been privately managing her assets since her grandmother's estate settled 5 years ago. No debt, no liabilities. A cleaner balance sheet than most of my corporate clients." Rebecca didn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed. Thomas ran a hand down his face like he was trying to wipe the shock off his skin. I remained perfectly still, letting the silence deliver the final blow. It said everything I didn't need to say. "You picked the wrong girl to underestimate. You've been sitting on this the entire time," Thomas asked finally. "Yes," I answered, "because I wanted to know how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing." My voice didn't waver, not even when Rebecca's eyes narrowed like she'd swallowed something bitter. Turns out, the answer was exactly what I suspected. Daniel arrived just then, his coat half off, hair windblown, eyes darting from face to face as he took in the tension. "Sorry I'm late," he said breathlessly. "I had to settle something at the firm." Rebecca's gaze snapped toward him, an accusation hiding behind motherly concern. "Daniel, did you know about this?" she asked, gesturing toward the portfolio documents like they were grenades. "I found out yesterday," he replied, stepping closer to me, "and I support her fully." His hand brushed mine on the armrest, a silent affirmation. "We're not asking for your approval. We're offering transparency, something this family could use more of." Rebecca blinked, stunned that her son had sided so openly against her. "I see," Thomas muttered, slumping back into his seat. "So this is how it's going to be." "No," Daniel said, his voice firm. "This is how it always should have been." Mr. Conrad stood slowly and handed over the final copy of the prenup, already signed by me and awaiting Daniel's signature. "If you agree with the terms, you'll sign here and here," he said, pointing to the flag tabs. "Otherwise, I advise you to reconsider attending the wedding at all." The room hung in delicate silence as Thomas picked up the pen. Rebecca reached out to stop him, but faltered when he looked at her. Something passed between them. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. And then he signed. The moment Thomas set the pen down, something in the room shifted. It wasn't peace, not yet, but the sharp tension that had once dominated the air began to unravel. Rebecca looked at the document like it might grow teeth and bite her, but she said nothing. She sat perfectly still, her manicured fingers clenched around the porcelain handle of her untouched teacup. The silence stretched until Mr. Conrad nodded, satisfied, and carefully gathered the signed pages. "I'll have this filed with both legal teams by morning," he said, sliding the documents back into his leather folio. "If anything changes, you'll be notified in writing." Thomas nodded curtly, his face unreadable now, his mask back in place. "You'll be attending the wedding then?" I asked, watching their eyes carefully. Rebecca blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question, but she recovered fast. "If Daniel still wants us there," she said, her voice softening by half a degree, "we wouldn't miss it. I didn't look at Daniel. I wanted the invitation, or rejection, to come from him." "Yes," he said, voice calm but firm. "You should be there, but know this. Lila and I are equals. That's not up for debate anymore." Rebecca's lips pressed together in a line, but she gave the smallest of nods. "Understood," she said, rising to her feet with the grace of a woman trying to keep her pride stitched together. "I'll see you at the rehearsal dinner." Her eyes met mine again, something deeper flickering there. Confusion, maybe even respect. For once, she didn't look past me. Mr. Conrad and I stepped out into the chilly evening together, the front door closing behind us like the end of a long chapter. Daniel followed, but not before pausing to speak with his parents quietly in the foyer. I didn't eavesdrop. Whatever he needed to say, I wanted him to own it. As Mr. Conrad and I reached the car, he placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "You held your ground better than most corporate CEOs," he said. "Your grandmother would be damn proud." The comment hit deeper than I expected, and I blinked hard against the tears that threatened to rise. "Thank you for everything," I whispered. "I couldn't have done this alone." He shook his head. "You didn't need me to win. You just needed someone to witness it." Daniel caught up to me just as Mr. Conrad's car disappeared into traffic. He looked tired, his posture finally beginning to sag now that the adrenaline had drained from his system. "That could have gone a lot worse," he said. "It also could have gone better," I replied. "But I'm not sure your parents know how to lose gracefully." He laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "They'll come around," he said, almost to himself. "Eventually." We walked in silence toward my car, the late autumn wind tugging at our sleeves. When I reached for the handle, Daniel touched my elbow. "Can I stay at your place tonight?" he asked. "Not for anything else, just I don't want to be alone with them right now." I studied his face, saw the fatigue, the fracture lines of a man trying to peel himself away from a family's shadow. "Yeah," I said finally. "But you're folding laundry while I pack for the hotel tomorrow." His smile was tired, but genuine. "Deal." That night, as we stood in the kitchen reheating leftover risotto, the tension between us eased into something quieter. Not resolution, not yet, but recognition. We were in this together, finally on even ground. The next morning was a whirlwind of dress bags, last-minute texts, and my sister Ava arriving 2 hours earlier than planned. She stood in my hallway with a travel coffee in one hand and a garment bag in the other. "Mom's already crying and I haven't even zipped my dress," she announced. "Dad's trying to memorize his speech, but it sounds like a political campaign." I laughed, grateful for her presence, her energy always loud and comforting. She took one look at Daniel folding towels on the couch and raised an eyebrow. "You sleep here?" she asked him, voice neutral. "I did," he replied. "Didn't want to be at my parents' house last night." Ava looked at me, then back at him, and nodded once. "Fair." After she disappeared into the spare room to change, Daniel reached for my hand. "Your family loves you," he said quietly. "It's different from what I'm used to." I squeezed his fingers, then let go. "It's why I fight so hard to keep myself intact, because I know what it looks like to be whole." The rehearsal dinner was held in a quiet rooftop venue we'd chosen before the guest list ballooned under Rebecca's suggestions. After everything, we'd trimmed it back to just 30 people, our real people, friends who had supported us, family who had never asked for more than our happiness. The view of the city was golden in the evening light, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. Rebecca and Thomas arrived exactly on time, no earlier, no later. She wore navy silk and a tight-lipped expression that cracked slightly when she saw Daniel standing beside me. Thomas gave me a curt nod, then retreated to speak with the officiant, who had clearly been prepped to keep things smooth. "You look beautiful," Rebecca said, and though the compliment was stiff, it wasn't fake. "Thank you," I replied. "It's my mother's favorite dress." "I know," she said. "She told me last year at the engagement brunch that she remembered surprised me." For a second, I saw a version of her that wasn't polished ice. Then she looked away, and it vanished. Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know what city or country you're watching from and why you haven't subscribed yet. Dinner passed in a hum of low conversation and clinking silverware, the kind of warm background noise that usually calmed my nerves. But tonight, I kept scanning the room, looking for signs of fallout, cracks, or quiet resentment. Most people were too busy enjoying the view and the wine to notice anything off. Ava gave her toast halfway through the meal, and it was exactly what I needed. Funny, heartfelt, and laced with enough sibling sarcasm to make me cry laugh. Daniel looked at me when it was over and mouthed, "She's perfect!" and I nodded because it was true. Rebecca didn't speak publicly, though she offered polite smiles when addressed, and even complimented my aunt's earrings during dessert. I didn't expect a speech, but the silence still felt like a statement in its own right. Thomas made brief remarks about family legacies and new chapters, vague enough to satisfy social etiquette without naming me once. It didn't hurt the way it might have weeks ago. I had enough proof now to know I didn't need their validation to be worthy of this marriage. Later that night, back at the hotel suite, Daniel and I would stay in after the wedding. I finally let myself relax. Ava curled up on the couch in a robe, face shiny from a face mask, scrolling through rehearsal photos on her phone. "You look taller," she said, zooming in on one. "It's the heels," I replied, kicking them off. "They're basically medieval torture devices, but very effective." She chuckled and passed me her phone to approve pictures for the group chat. "Do you think she'll pull something tomorrow?" Ava asked, not looking up. "Rebecca?" I asked, then sighed. "No, I think she knows it wouldn't work now." Ava nodded, like that had been her read too. "She's not used to being outmaneuvered. Must be unsettling." She's used to controlling the narrative, I said. I took that away when I told the truth on my terms. Ava looked up then, her expression soft. You're going to be fine, she said. Even if everything implodes tomorrow, you're still you. I leaned my head on her shoulder. Thanks. I think that's what scares them the most. I didn't sleep much, but the morning of the wedding arrived quietly. No chaos, no emergencies. The suite buzzed with hair tools and laughter, my mother organizing breakfast trays like a general at war. Ava danced around in her socks, giving fake red carpet interviews into a curling iron. The makeup artist showed up early, which felt like a sign that the day might actually cooperate. My dress hung near the window, glowing in the soft light like something conjured out of a dream. Have you written your vows? My mother asked gently as she dabbed powder on her cheeks. Yes, I said, touching the envelope tucked inside my purse. They're short, but honest. That's what matters, she said, her smile proud but a little teary. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become. I nodded, too choked up to speak for a moment. A knock at the door startled everyone, but when Ava peeked through the peephole, she turned with a raised brow. It's Rebecca, she said. The room froze. My mother moved beside me, instinctively protective. Alone? I asked. Ava nodded. No entourage, no pearls, just her. I stood slowly, my heart doing strange flips, and walked to the door. When I opened it, Rebecca stood in a navy sheath dress, clutching a small, white box. May I come in? She asked. Briefly, I stepped aside, uncertain, and she entered with a grace that felt hesitant. I didn't come to criticize anything, she said, hands folded. I came to give you something. She held out the box, which I took cautiously. Inside were a pair of antique gold earrings, delicate and old, their settings shaped like tiny vines. They belonged to Daniel's great-grandmother, she said quietly. She was the first woman in our family to graduate college. I glanced up, surprised. I thought you'd want to pass these to a daughter. I thought so too, Rebecca replied, and something in her voice cracked a little. But I think she'd have liked you. She'd have seen herself in you more than in me. For a second, she looked unsure, like she didn't know what to do with the vulnerability she'd just exposed. Thank you, I said softly, and I meant it. She straightened, as if remembering who she was supposed to be. I'll see you at the venue, she said, and then she was gone before I could say anything else. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the earrings in my palm. Maybe it wasn't peace, but it was something adjacent. And after everything we'd been through, that felt like a win. Ava peeked around the corner. Well, she whispered. She didn't stab me, I whispered back. She gave me jewelry, so progress. The ceremony was held at a garden hall, just outside the city, enclosed in glass and crawling ivy. I walked down the aisle to soft string music, my arm linked with my father's, the entire room glowing in late afternoon gold. Daniel waited for me at the altar, eyes wet, smile open. In that moment, I didn't see his parents or the battles we'd fought. I just saw him. And I knew I wasn't walking into compromise, but something entirely our own. The vows came easier than I expected, my voice steady as I spoke words I'd written in the quiet corner of my mind long before I put them on paper. Daniel held my hands tightly, listening like each word mattered more than the next breath. When he read his vows, there was no mention of perfection, legacy, or promises he couldn't control. Just love, partnership, and the choice to show up, even when it's hard. The guests faded into a soft blur behind us, as if the world had dimmed so we could finally see each other fully. And when the officiant pronounced us married, the kiss wasn't showy. It was the kind that promised survival and 1,000 small beginnings. The reception began under warm lighting and late summer twilight, the music soft and nostalgic at first. Ava gave a second, unscripted speech after dessert, where she recounted the time Daniel had tried, and failed, to impress me by cooking risotto on a single burner in his studio apartment. Everyone laughed, including Rebecca, though her smile was small and fleeting. Thomas clapped politely, seated next to the governor's wife, who now seemed oddly interested in my company's expansion plans. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was performing at a party thrown by strangers. As we made our way through the crowd, I felt hands clasp mine and turned to see Sarah Wexler, one of my oldest mentors, beaming. "You did it," she said. "You married into the storm and came out the eye." I laughed and hugged her tightly, thinking about the way she'd helped me pitch my first client when I had nothing but a clunky prototype and a caffeine addiction. "Don't tell me you came just for the wedding," I teased. "The moment I heard what Rebecca tried, I booked a flight," she replied. "Wouldn't miss watching you outfox them for anything." Daniel and I danced to a slower song while our guests chatted and toasted around us, their laughter a pleasant hum in the background. He leaned close, his chin brushing my temple. "I feel like I can finally breathe," he whispered. "They've controlled me for so long, I forgot what it felt like to choose something on my own." I looked up at him, seeing not just the man I married, but the man he was still learning to become. "I think we both forgot how powerful choice is," I said, lacing my fingers behind his neck. "But we remembered in time." His forehead pressed against mine as the music shifted, and I felt the tension in his body finally, truly dissolve. This wasn't an ending. It was the first page written without someone else's pen. Later, while I stood near the edge of the dance floor sipping ginger ale, Rebecca approached again, this time alone, no Thomas, no social armor. She wore the same dress, but her posture had softened, no longer upright with expectation. "You handled yourself with dignity," she said, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "Even when we didn't." I waited, unsure if she was leading to something or if this was the something. "I never wanted to lose him," she continued, folding and unfolding a cocktail napkin between her fingers. "And when I saw how much he loved you, I realized I'd already lost the version of him I understood." Her voice wasn't shaky, but it carried weight. "That scared me. So I tried to control what I thought I still could." There it was, the thing she couldn't say at any of our meetings or brunches or arguments. Fear. "I'm not trying to take him away," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm trying to build something with him, something where he isn't split in half every time he makes a choice." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall behind me. "I see that now. I think I needed to see you under pressure to believe it." I gave a quiet nod, unsure whether to feel closure or just exhaustion. She started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "The earrings looked good on you," she said. "They belonged to a complicated woman. She would have respected your spine." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you," I said simply, and she disappeared back into the crowd. The rest of the night passed in waves. Speeches, dancing, friends I hadn't seen in years pulling me aside to reminisce. Daniel's cousin Jack, who once dismissed me as the editor girl, asked if I'd be open to speaking at a conference his firm was hosting on digital learning. I smiled, nodded, and handed him my assistant's email like a professional. Somewhere near midnight, I spotted Thomas at the bar, alone, sipping what looked like his third or fourth whiskey. He didn't approach me, and I didn't approach him. As the crowd thinned and the night grew quieter, Daniel and I finally slipped away, stepping into the elevator that led to our hotel suite. His tie was loosened, my shoes were in my hand, and both of us were grinning like kids who had gotten away with something huge. "So," he said, turning toward me as the doors closed, "are we the kind of couple who opens gifts the night of, or are we too emotionally exhausted for that?" I laughed, leaning against his shoulder. Emotionally exhausted wins. Barely. The suite was quiet, luxurious, and smelled faintly of vanilla and champagne. I dropped the shoes near the bed and sat on the edge, finally still. Daniel pulled off his jacket, set it on a chair, and sat beside me in silence. It took a minute before either of us said anything. "Did we win?" he asked, voice low. "No," I said, thinking of all we'd fought through. "We didn't win. We changed the game." And in that moment, with the city lights stretching out beneath the window and the weight of everything behind us, I knew that was better. The first morning of marriage didn't feel different, but it felt earned. Daniel woke before me and made coffee in the kitchenette, his hair a mess and shirt wrinkled, and still, I thought he looked exactly like someone I'd choose again. I wrapped a blanket around myself and stood by the window, watching the city stir into motion, one street lamp at a time. Neither of us spoke right away. It wasn't silence, it was quiet, and quiet felt good. "You know, my parents will still test boundaries," Daniel said finally, handing me a mug. They'll try to reframe the last week like it was all a misunderstanding. I nodded, taking a sip. They can reframe it however they want, as long as they don't try to rewrite us. He exhaled slowly, sitting on the couch beside me, elbows on his knees. I thought standing up to them would feel like setting something on fire, he said, but it didn't. That's because it wasn't destruction, I replied. It was a reset. He glanced at me, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. You're always better at putting words to feelings. By noon, we'd packed our bags and left the suite, heading back to the apartment to swap luggage before flying out for the honeymoon. Daniel's parents had gifted us 2 weeks in Tuscany, something they offered long before the prenup debacle. Are you still okay with accepting the trip? He asked in the cab. Or do we burn the tickets in protest? I shook my head. Let them contribute. It doesn't buy them back their leverage. Back at the apartment, I slipped into familiar routines while Daniel double-checked our passports and booked the ride-share to the airport. The quiet hum of normalcy wrapped around us like a worn-in sweater. My laptop dinged with a calendar alert, and I paused before dismissing it. I'd set the notification weeks ago as a reminder to finalize last-minute vendor payments, back when I still thought this wedding would be about flowers and timelines. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I tidied up my desk, I noticed the original prenup, the one Rebecca had handed me, still tucked inside the lower drawer. For a second, I considered shredding it, but something stopped me. I placed it inside a folder marked Lessons, along with other relics of this journey. I didn't need to keep it out of sentimentality. I needed to remember that even the ugliest truths had taught me something about my own backbone. The airport was crowded, but somehow everything moved easily around us. No delays, no lost luggage, no forgotten IDs, just forward motion. On the plane, Daniel fell asleep before takeoff, his head tilted toward me, his hand warm in mine. I looked out the window as we rose through the clouds, thinking not just of Italy, but of the version of me that had survived the last month. She didn't disappear now that the ring was on my finger. She was just evolving. We landed in Florence under an amber dusk, the sky smeared with soft purples and honeyed gold. The villa was tucked into a hillside, the kind of place that smelled like rosemary and old stone, with wine glasses already waiting in the room. We toasted quietly that night, not to escaping, not to winning, but to arriving, not just here, but at this version of us, whole, weathered, still standing. For the first few days, we did nothing but rest and eat and rediscover who we were, without conflict lurking around every corner. We cooked pasta in the villa's kitchen, drank too much Chianti, and took long walks down dirt paths lined with olive trees. Daniel sketched the views in a notebook he never mentioned owning, and I wrote pieces of a short story I hadn't realized I needed to tell. We didn't talk about the Hayes family. We didn't talk about the prenup. But by day 6, the subject returned. Uninvited, but inevitable. We were sitting on a stone bench outside the villa, the sun sinking low, casting everything in bronze. Do you think they'll treat us differently now? Daniel asked, eyes fixed on the horizon. Or just hide the judgment better? Both, I said, but I'm not building my life around their projections anymore. I want to be better than I've been, he said quietly. Less quiet, less bendable. I looked over at him, really looked. Then don't wait for them to challenge you. Draw your lines before they're crossed. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing each word one by one. Later that night, while I was brushing my teeth, Daniel knocked gently on the bathroom door. I did something, he said, stepping in with a sheepish expression. Good or legally questionable? I teased through foam. Hopefully good, he replied, pulling up an email on his phone. He had sent a message to his parents, a state attorney, formally requesting that all future discussions of inheritance or family business ventures include both of us. I wanted it in writing, he said. No more shadow negotiations. If they can't say it in front of you, they don't say it at all. I wiped my mouth and kissed him. That, I said, is a man I'm proud to be married to. The final days of the honeymoon unfolded like pages from a quiet novel. Simple meals, shared books, long naps in sunlit corners. We visited a small bookstore in town where the owner, an older woman named Lucia, insisted I take a leather-bound journal for stories yet to be written. I thanked her in halting Italian, feeling like a version of myself I hadn't met in years, unrushed, unguarded, curious again. Daniel and I sat on the balcony that evening, trading stories from our childhoods, unearthing small truths we'd never thought to share. Each memory felt like a brick laid gently between us, building something sturdier than we'd had before. When we returned home, the city greeted us with its usual indifference. Horns blaring, neighbors yelling at delivery drivers, the kind of chaos that felt oddly comforting. My inbox had 182 unread messages, most from clients, collaborators, and one slightly panicked assistant. I spent the first morning back catching up, answering only what couldn't wait and ignoring what could. Daniel returned to the firm a day later, refreshed but wary. "Let's see how long the post-honeymoon glow survives corporate law," he joked, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The voicemail from Thomas came in just after lunch on Thursday, and I let it sit for 2 hours before playing it. His tone was measured, cautious, layered with something that sounded faintly like humility. "I'd like to speak with both of you, over dinner, if possible," he said. "Nothing formal, just conversation." I replayed the message twice, trying to read between every syllable. I forwarded it to Daniel with a single line, "Your move." He responded 10 minutes later, "Let's hear him out. One dinner. Boundaries intact." I agreed, but only if we picked the location and kept it neutral. No country club, no family estate, no home turf advantage. Daniel suggested a small Italian restaurant we liked downtown, the kind with dim lighting and private booths. "It's hard to perform under soft lighting," he said. "Makes everyone a little too real." When Thomas arrived, he was alone, early, and not wearing his usual armor of tailored suits and Rolex confidence. He looked tired, older somehow, like the last few weeks had forced him to reconsider more than just his assumptions about me. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as we approached the table. "Of course," Daniel replied, sliding into the booth beside me. I didn't speak until the waitress brought water. "You said this wasn't formal," I said carefully, "so let's skip the small talk." Thomas nodded slowly, folding his napkin with deliberate care. "Fair. I'm not here to revise history. You have every right to be angry with us. With me, especially." His eyes flicked to mine, and for once, they didn't carry judgment. "Just wait. I've spent my life believing I could predict people," he continued. "Measure them, classify them, control the outcomes." He took a breath, looked down, then back up. "You disrupted that, and I've realized that was the best thing that could have happened." Daniel remained quiet, watching his father as if seeing him in an unfamiliar light. I wasn't ready to accept an apology wrapped in abstract reflections, so I kept my posture still. "You didn't just try to control an outcome," I said. "You tried to erase my voice from it. That isn't something that gets undone with dinner and a carefully worded speech." "I know," Thomas said quietly. "I do." He looked at Daniel then. "You were right to choose her, not because of the money or the company or the way she held her own against us, but because she made you step out of our shadow." Daniel blinked, startled, then nodded once. "You should know," Thomas added, turning back to me. "Rebecca asked me not to come tonight. She still believes dignity means distance, but I wanted you to hear it from me, even if it never changes anything else." There was no manipulation in his tone, only resignation, the kind of truth that comes when someone realizes the cost of their own pride. When the check came, he reached for it, but Daniel stopped him. "We've got it," he said. "Consider it the cost of admission to the new version of us." Thomas offered no protest, only a small nod, then left without asking for a future meeting. As the door closed behind him, I finally let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We walked home in silence, fingers intertwined, the city noise strangely muted around us. "You think he meant all of that?" Daniel asked. "I think he believes he did," I replied. "Which is a start, not a finish." Daniel squeezed my hand gently. Still, it felt different, like he actually saw us for the first time. That weekend, Ava came over with coffee and a stack of wedding prints that had just arrived. We sat on the living room floor, flipping through them, laughing at the candid ones and pausing at the quiet, beautiful moments caught on camera. "You know," she said, holding up a photo of Daniel and me during our first dance, "you look like someone who finally came home to herself." I smiled, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. The woman in those photos wasn't surviving. She was choosing. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received an unexpected package from Rebecca. The handwriting on the envelope was careful, each letter deliberate, and the return address was their Lake Forest estate. I opened it slowly, half expecting another veiled gesture of control, but instead found a small hardcover book inside, a copy of Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Inside the front cover was a short inscription in Rebecca's elegant script, for the woman who answered back with grace instead of silence. No explanation, no signature beyond her initials, just those 9 words, carefully chosen. I stared at the inscription for a long time, uncertain whether to accept it as a peace offering or a final chess move. But the words didn't bite. They sat in my palm like a stone that had been polished smooth, not thrown. I placed the book on the shelf beside my grandmother's worn copy of The Great Gatsby, not as a symbol of reconciliation, but as a record of endurance. Ava, who was over helping me reorganize the office, peeked over my shoulder and raised a brow. Did hell freeze, or is she evolving? Maybe both, I replied, sliding the book into place. Either way, I'm not holding my breath. Ava nodded and returned to color-coding client folders like nothing had happened. But I noticed she glanced at the book one more time, her mouth twitching in a half-smile. Even she knew we were somewhere new now, no longer defending ourselves, just living. The company had expanded over the last quarter. New contracts, a small team of engineers, a project manager who actually liked Gantt charts. For the first time, I wasn't hesitating to invest or make long-term plans. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval or permission. Daniel helped revise our office lease, ensuring the new space stayed in my name alone. No more blurred lines, he said. Not with your legacy. He'd changed too, not drastically, not overnight, but enough that it showed in the way he spoke up during family dinners and pushed back when needed. He no longer asked his parents before making personal decisions. He shared them after they were made. That was the version of Daniel I had chosen at the altar, the one who didn't just love me, but respected the architecture of what I'd built before him. And now, he was learning how to build beside me. Sunday dinners with the Hayes family still happened, but only once a month, and only by mutual agreement. The first few were stiff, Rebecca sticking to safe topics like seasonal produce and garden renovations. But eventually, she asked about my latest project without veiled skepticism. I read something about adaptive learning platforms in Forbes, she said one evening, her fork pausing midair. I assume your team's working on something similar? We're developing a variation, I said, careful but not cold, geared towards students with limited access to high-speed internet. Think low-bandwidth tech that works in underfunded districts. Her mouth twitched, like she wanted to object but couldn't quite find a reason. That's smart, she said after a moment. Unexpectedly so. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't dismissal either. And that small difference changed everything. I didn't need her to become someone else. I just needed her to stop trying to shape me into someone I never was. Thomas, for his part, kept a professional distance unless spoken to directly, but he no longer looked at me like I was a rogue element in a carefully managed portfolio. The night Daniel told me he'd turned down a promotion at the firm, we were curled up on the couch, our dog, yes, a rescue mutt named Cricket, snoring between us. It would have meant longer hours, more travel, and more time with clients I don't respect, he said. And I'd be doing it for my father's approval, not mine. I didn't answer right away. I just reached over and rubbed Cricket's ears, letting the sound of his soft breathing fill the space. You don't owe anyone legacy, I said finally. Especially not at the expense of your peace. Daniel rested his head against my shoulder, and for the first time, I felt how much lighter he was. Not because of the money, the marriage, or the career pivot, but because he had finally stopped trying to prove his worth to people who could only see it conditionally. That kind of freedom was worth more than any trust fund. We celebrated our 6-month anniversary with homemade pasta, a bottle of red wine, and a stack of handwritten notes we'd been exchanging weekly since the wedding. It had started as a joke, Ava's idea, but quickly became something sacred. No digital distractions, no elaborate gifts, just ink and truth. Sometimes the notes were sweet, sometimes sarcastic, but always real. Daniel's latest note was 2 paragraphs and a doodle of me giving a TED Talk with my hands in the air and flames behind me. "You didn't just scare them," he wrote. "You taught them what it means to stand upright in a world that wants you bent." I laughed when I read it, then cried a little, because he wasn't wrong, and because hearing it from the man who once stayed silent meant more than any applause. That night, while brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror and thought of all the versions of me I'd had to become to get here. The girl who took the meeting with Mr. Conrad 5 years ago and didn't flinch. The woman who refused to sign a contract written in arrogance. The bride who said yes only after saying no. They had all been necessary. None of them would have made it here alone. I wasn't building a life of quiet revenge or whispered victory. I was building one that didn't require explanations. One where power wasn't worn like a coat but carried like a compass. I didn't need everyone to understand the choices I'd made. I just needed to keep making them without apology. So when I sat at my desk the next morning drafting a letter of intent for a national school partnership, I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. I was doing it because I could. Because no one was in the room to interrupt, correct, or redirect me. Because $7 million gave me options, but confidence gave me permission. And because 2 days before my wedding, someone handed me a pen thinking it would trap me, when all it did was give me something to write with. Thank you for listening to Lila's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.